Right, here with Plastician. Thanks for joining us. Similar to the topic of Spotify playlists, we're going to touch on how to structure a release schedule now, which you could argue is a bit of a dark art these days as well. I think there's a lot of differing opinions on how you should go about releasing music, but it'd be great to get your opinion with your experience in this. I guess my first question is around some comments made by Spotify CEO Daniel Ek recently, who caused a bit of controversy by suggesting that the days of artists, releasing an album and then going silent for 3 or 4 years are over, and that there's this need to keep feeding your audience with content. Understandably, caused a bit of controversy because not all artists can fund that sort of release schedule. There are those that might release an album then go out on tour, don't necessarily have time or the finances to commit to that sort of schedule. But putting, I guess, that controversy aside and our own feelings about that sort of approach, there, it'd be good to understand from your perspective, having been in the industry for a long time, how has streaming services, how have they impacted the way that you release your music?
Yeah. So obviously when I started out, it was all vinyl, so it was all physical, and distribution then was very much pay for it, wait for it, and then get it literally physically into shops, which um, was, was what it was. It wasn't a bad earner, but you really needed to know what you were doing to even kind of like step foot into that. So one thing the streaming world has done is it's kind of like it's made it a little bit more accessible to bedroom producers all the way up to recording artists. The entry is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
The only difference is, like we're saying, like the way that you plan and promote a release and the funds that you have access to make that happen. So where the money has been saved, more money is being spent on things like marketing, being clever. Social media is obviously here now, and it wasn't when I started. It literally was just like word of mouth and hearing your music on the radio, pirate radio. We didn't even have YouTube or anything like that when I started out. So there's been so many different kinds of learning, and I feel like I'm still learning now because things change all the time. New platforms come out, other platforms disappear, uh, promotional methods appear and present themselves. Things like TikTok, songs going viral on TikTok having a massive effect on like the charts and stuff like that now. So you gotta be prepared to adapt, and you have to accept change as well. There are a lot of people my age who were born into that idea of physical copies into the shops, paid like cash in hand, all that kind of thing. Some of them do get a little bit too stuck in the past, and yeah, it was great, but we have to accept that those days are gone, and we have to adapt. Otherwise, we'll get left in the dust. And I think that the change into streaming, even from like digital files like iTunes to the streaming model, was probably the most drastic change in terms of the effect that it will have on the art as well. You know, songs are getting shorter because they want to hit more plays. Uh, Albums are almost like playlists. They don't really have that, perhaps the care and attention that an older album might have done. That whole like listening experience of an album versus like a single is almost lost in the streaming era. So it makes you think a little bit more about, shortening down your releases, singles versus albums, targeting playlists with singles and stuff like that as well. There's so many different things that we have to think about now that I didn't have to. But I think all of those things are things that you have to think about when you're planning the schedule of your release and all of the promo that's going to go around, making sure that it has the best opportunity when it lands.
You sort of touched on there with the schedule and how to go about releasing things. And I'm thinking of a scenario that I've seen crop up on Community a couple of times as well, where an artist might have an EP, and there's 5 or 6 tracks ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
When would you, in a sort of an ideal world, what might that release schedule look like? What would the time be, and how many songs, for example, might you put out before you drop that final piece?
So I guess if for me, like if I mean, I'm still a romantic. I do like an EP. I think EPs are great, especially in the current climate. Um, Outside of streaming sites like Bandcamp, where like your kind of core fan base will probably happily pay a few pounds for the EP rather than stream it online. So with an EP, I'd probably be thinking of doing something along the lines of a campaign that maybe launches slightly earlier on Bandcamp so that your kind of core audience, your diehard fans, can get it maybe a week before it lands on streaming platforms and then pay you for it. Because the beauty of Bandcamp versus streaming is the money comes in instantly as well, so it helps cash flow. And you know, if you want to do a pre-order, you can put pre-orders on there. That money comes in straight away as well, and then you can reinvest some of that money into the ongoing promotion of the release if you wanted to pitch it to playlists and you know some of the stuff that we talked about on the playlisting chat that we had. And yeah, I mean, there's loads of things you can spend your money on in a promotional campaign, but it buys you a bit of time as well because that release is already generating money in the background while you are gearing up to you know pitch your release to Spotify, um, get the content together. You know, little things like you might get a nice comment on Bandcamp about the album that you can then use as a quote in social media posts and stuff like that.
Mm.
You know, you've got time, and I think like for me, I like I normally tend to schedule releases about a month ahead of when they're going to come out. So the first thing I'll do is obviously have the files together, get all of the artwork and the masters back. Um, so have everything ready to put it into the distributor, and won't even mention it to anyone until my distributor has confirmed the release date with me, because I've made that mistake loads of times in the past. That I would say albums coming out in August, and then stuff happens. It starts getting to June and July, and you're like, the artwork's not here yet. I'm still haven't finished a track, and then you're putting pressure on yourself. So I'd say like get the art done, get the music finished, and then don't schedule anything until that distributor has come back to you and confirmed that release date as well. So that's the first thing, and then try and like get a release date that's got you like that 4 weeks. In that 4 weeks, you want to be focusing mostly on um, engaging your audience, letting them know that it's there. You can get us maybe a Spotify pre-save link going, get a pre-order live on Bandcamp. Maybe think about giving the Bandcamp release a week um, early, maybe, so that your diehard fans will pay for it, be a bit more incentivized to get it before. You know, if they really want to hear it, they can get it a week early, and you can take that. You know, that's 100% profit for you. Well, 90% on Bandcamp, unless you do it on a Bandcamp day. The first Friday of most months, they will waive their fee, so you'll take 100% of anything if you launch it on one of those days. Something that I'd recommend doing. Um, and yeah, just basically pitching it to press, sending it to DJs, especially if it's like electronic music, sending it to radio. All of that kind of stuff is stuff that you should be doing in the lead up to your release. The earlier the better. For print media, they normally want like 6 to 8 weeks. So if you're looking at trying to pitch it into like magazines, to get your music in any of the print magazines, you might want 6 to 8 weeks ahead of the release date. But if you're not too worried about that and it's just online, I'd say 3 to 4 weeks is normally enough to get everything done. And yeah, you just want to be working hard at getting it in as many places as you can. Make sure that you know you're constantly talking about it. Week of release is going to be heavy on Twitter and Instagram, and then after that, the roll on from that is making sure that you've got a nice constant flow of content landing on your socials. Maybe some, if you can get on the radio to promote it, if you can get on YouTube, if you can do a podcast, like all of that stuff helps after. Once people know where they can find it, if you can direct them to where they can listen to it or buy it, that that should roll on for at least another 3 or 4 weeks after, and beyond that as well, if it's like an album or something.
Yeah, it's interesting, that idea of the sort of Bandcamp exclusive. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's me, definitely.
I think one thing that'd be interesting to sort of get your take on is, you know, I see a lot of, and maybe this is less EP and more sort of album based material, but you will see artists now, it's quite common for them to almost have half the album out, you know, via single or double track releases in the lead up to that album. You know, I know of some bands, for example, some, you know, bigger artists actually that um, start releasing music 3-4 months before the
Yeah.
album drops, and by the time it comes, you know, you've heard half of the album. Why do you think they're, you know, they're kind of doing that as a strategy? And you know, would you recommend, even for something like a 6-track EP, would you recommend getting some material out beforehand?
I'd say like a 6-track EP. I think it wouldn't hurt to have, you know, like a couple of singles maybe. I'd say more than that might be overkill on a 6-track, but maybe a couple of singles if there are two, like if the release is the kind of thing that offers itself to a single, you know, like if you're putting a 6-track ambient EP out, there's probably not too much point of like pitching a single unless something's absolutely like outstanding on it. But if you are like a vocalist, a rapper, or you're in a band, definitely like singles are the way to go because you get a couple of cracks at that algorithm before the album drops. I did it myself a couple of months ago. I released a 33-track compilation album, and the first thing I did was put all of that into the distributor. So the full 33-track album was scheduled for release like about 8 weeks in advance, and in the 4 or 5 weeks leading up to that drop, each Friday I dropped a single from it. Um, so you have to do a little bit of trickery with ISRC codes and stuff like that, so that when the album does land, those tracks are attributed to the album and they don't live on their own in their own little EPs away from the main project.
Mm.
We'll get into that another time. That's quite complicated. Maybe we'll add that into the community thread. But what it meant was I had 5 separate pitches to Spotify for artists as a single. And singles are much more likely to land in those playlists than a track from an album that's where you pitch the entire album. But what it also meant that was, so I had 4 tracks from 4 different artists, all pitched in. None of them actually landed in any of the editorial lists, apart from one of them. But what it did mean was by the time that the main album was dropping, like 8 weeks down the line, the algorithm had already kicked in for 4 or 5 songs that were already attributed to that album. So the final pitch was another track from said album, and in that pitch, you know, the data goes with it that this is the final single from the album that drops on the same day. Uh, these tracks have come out. Spotify's algorithms already picked those tracks up because they're already doing bits in a couple of their playlists, and across all of those tracks, I think they'd managed to pull together just over 50,000 streams between the 4 of them. So, you know, it ticks a lot of boxes straight away, and it meant that that track, that final track that I pitched from the main album pitch, also found its way into some playlists because Spotify could see people were enjoying the stuff that had already come out from that album. And it just meant that that album got pushed a little bit more into that algorithm. And for the first few weeks when it came out, it was really like hitting heavy on Spotify. And I think that was a lot down to the splitting it into singles because those, it gives it a bit more digestible. Those singles are going to outperform most of the album tracks because of that. They had that like running start, whereas the album an album's almost like a playlist these days. You know what I mean? And in the case of this, there's 33 tracks on it. You know, it's a lot. I don't expect anyone to sit there and listen to that front to back. It's not even designed to be necessarily listened like that. It is more of a, it's almost like a playlist rather than like an album in that sense. So I think that the singles route is definitely something to consider if you have singles that are like punchy. Do you know what I mean? The tracks I picked for those were 5 of the most kind of stand out in terms of like they have catchy riffs in them and stuff like that because it's instrumental music that I'm putting out, so it's a little bit harder to define what a single would sound like. But you know, if you're in a band or you're a rapper or a singer, you know what a single sounds like. It's different to like a kind of retrospective piece on an album perhaps. And yeah, just
Yeah,
consider that.
it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's sort of somewhere between, you know, I could be wrong with this, but it kind of seemed like back in the day you had the sort of big single release, then maybe a follow-up. You
Yeah,
know, I'm talking quite commercial releases here.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe a follow-up, get a bit of radio play, album drops, go
Exactly.
out
One
to
or
it.
two tracks max. Yeah,
Yeah, and it's almost kind of, we then went through that period, and again, this is a luxury probably only afforded to big artists, but you suddenly had just the album drops out of nowhere, you know, no promotion,
exactly.
you know, um, and now you sort of, I feel like you're seeing less of that now, and actually it's the opposite. You're getting a lot of releases from a
Yeah,
record, you know, before the thing to that point where you have heard quite a lot of it before it drops. And I mean, it makes sense, and I guess it's an example of what Daniel Ek was talking about from Spotify. There's this idea of just feeding that algorithm, you know, keeping yourself top of mind for those fans. I guess giving songs opportunities to land in playlists. And it's interesting. I mean, I guess this is the sort of age-old debate since streaming came about, but do you think, in your opinion, and I guess it probably differs depending on the sort of artist you are, but in your opinion, do albums, I guess maybe taking away some of the romance from it, do albums and EPs still make sense? You know, are we better off just adopting a sort of a single only, or, you know?
I think for me, like I still like I I have released singles, but the thing for me is from my experience running a label is if I build an EP of like 4 tracks, maybe a few more, that sells really well on Bandcamp, and you're making about £4 per sale. Whereas if you put a single out, doesn't really sell on Bandcamp, does better on streaming, but that balance is different. It's like doing well on streaming doesn't necessarily mean you're earning a lot of money still. You know, you could sell 50 EPs on Bandcamp and make like £200. To make £200 on a streaming platform, you need like about 300,000 streams. Like it's it doesn't necessarily always work in your favor to just concentrate on Spotify. If you can find that
Yeah,
balance, like here's an EP you can buy on Bandcamp for £4, and it's going to be on Spotify, but here's 2 singles in the lead up to it, so it's got 2 shots at trying to get that Spotify up to that maybe 300,000 streams over the course of what might take 6 to 12 months, depending on how big or small you are as an artist as well. You know, it's no small feat to hit those kind of numbers.
mm.
But if you've got 50 people who might buy your EP, that's very much attainable for many artists. Anyone who's got decent music and a small, even a small following, 50 EPs sold is like is quite an obtainable um, number.
Yeah,
And £200 for an EP, it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but this is the music industry that we're in, and £200 to invest into the next EP and then the next one. It all, you know, the reality of it is there may not be a lot of money, but I do think that you should give yourself the best opportunity to earn what you can, and for me, that's why EPs still matter to me. Is that they sell way better on Bandcamp, and then the profit is better.
mm.
If I put a great single out that absolutely smashes it on Spotify, it doesn't even come close to an average EP sales on Bandcamp. I don't think people buy singles that much. It's kind of unusual, but that's been my experience. Like some of my biggest tracks have done like hundreds of thousands of spins on Spotify, but maybe only sold 50 copies on Bandcamp. Whereas stuff like that album, for example, the Wavepool album, was a 30 track compilation. You know, the Bandcamp offer for that was quite good value because it was like £10, I think it was for all 30 tracks. So they're getting a pretty decent deal there. It works out about 30p a track or whatever it was, 10p a track, and people will pay that, and lots of people will pay that. So it swings and roundabouts. You know, there's songs on that album, for example, that have probably not even barely scraped 1,000 streams, made less than £1, but attributed across all of the sales on Bandcamp, they made a lot more than £1 per track because of the sales that generated. So I think it's still, especially if you're starting out, I definitely think that you can adopt the sales versus streaming a little bit more.
Mm.
And if you've got like a diehard core fan base, they will pay for it, knowing full well that that's supporting you way more. And I think that that is something that people should really like think about when they're doing their release schedule. Don't write
That's
off the sales still.
that's really interesting. I think it's. I mean, I'm just thinking. I've actually kind of observed that myself, where I might, discover a great track maybe via Spotify,
Yeah,
um, and visit that artist profile and can't find the full release, but
yes,
can find it on Bandcamp, and will therefore. So it's almost like you can perhaps use that, if you can get into a couple of playlists and get some
exactly,
traction on Spotify, to your point, then do an exclusive Bandcamp
exactly.
to your
I think
audience.
a lot of people say that Spotify is like the shop window and Bandcamp is the shop. It's like
Mm,
that's true. Like if the shop window is like have a look at what we've got, and like you might walk past a shop and be like that looks interesting, and then you go in the shop and you actually buy it, and that's kind of like if you think of like the music industry as like Spotify being the window, um, but your core product and like your sales, your base of people who actually put their hand in their pocket and support what you're doing, that's Bandcamp. And I think that's why you shouldn't. I don't understand. Some people are just like, oh, I don't want to be on Spotify. I don't care about it. It's like you should care about it because if someone discovers you on Spotify and thinks you're the most amazing artist they've ever heard in their life, the next thing that you put out, they'll spend £10 on it on Bandcamp, and they'll buy a ticket to your gig and they'll buy your merch and stuff like that. Whereas
mm.
90% of people who hear you on Spotify might not care. But if you can convert 5 to 10% of those people across to not just listening but actually like buying it as well, like you build that month on month, you can live, you can actually make a living.
Yeah,
So I think that like using Spotify like that, um, that kind of discovery platform, and then Bandcamp as like selling to your diehards who really want to like help you succeed, and
it's yeah.
communicate that with your fans as well.
And I guess the missing, the ingredient that a lot of people forget at times is make sure the music's good.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. The music still has to be good. You can't put
Yeah,
absolute dog shit out and expect it to do well, right? It does have to be good, but if it is good and you give it the best opportunity to be heard, and then you know communicate that there are better places for people to support, for those who follow you on your socials and stuff like that and really care about what you're doing, if you can send a few of those to Bandcamp, you'll see a difference in your actual earnings and your revenue, definitely.
awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Stish. I
Cool.
think some really interesting stuff in there. If you're watching this and you're on the community thread, and there's anything that we haven't covered that maybe you want to ask us a question, we'll be in the thread. So do drop any questions you have in there, and we'll do our best to respond. Thanks again, Stish.
Nice. Cheers for having me.
Right.
Easy.